Bassoon Introductions, Efficient Practice, and Auditions with Gareth Thomas. Stay inspired. One of our attendees, Angela, and she's asked, could you share with us any scholarship or work study opportunities that come to mind for when you studied at CIM, and then even specifically for bassoonists?
CIM is the school I know best in Cleveland, of course. For undergrad, you said she's in high school, I think. For undergrad, there's merit-based and there's need-based scholarship. There are opportunities in both directions, and CIM has actually, as I understand it, fairly recently I think they've lowered their enrollment numbers, and they've actually managed to decrease their tuition costs, which is great. And of course, lowering the enrollment numbers means that they can offer more competitive scholarship. So if ever there were more incentive needed to practice your scales, and I don't think there ever was, but if you needed more, then that's it. Because there are many more opportunities there. As far as and CIM, as I say, is the school that I know best, and it's the school where there's very high level teaching is happening. That's of course not limited to CIM in Cleveland, though it's maybe the most famous example. But there are other universities too in the area, and they're hurting for bassoonists. They would love to have anybody apply. So there are opportunities here as far as that goes. I did work study all 4 years that I was there. I was an usher for the concerts that they did. The thing about CIM is there are a lot of orchestra concerts that happen. There are 2 orchestras at CIM, and there are concerts basically every week. I know Carl Topolos has retired after a lengthy and illustrious career there. But I assume that the system of orchestra concerts that he set up will continue, whereby it's less of a typical collegiate orchestra schedule where you practice the same program for weeks or months on end before a concert happens. It's much closer to a professional schedule where there are 4 or 5 rehearsals. At the school, it's over a course of maybe 2 weeks instead of 1 week. But that's only because there are more people to accommodate. It's much closer to what you would encounter in the workforce. And so I was an usher, and I did a lot of that. And there's a great opportunity there. There's any number of different work studies you can do. I can't even begin to scratch the surface of everything you can do. There's the lab orchestra as well. Not that you'll be hurting for opportunities to play an orchestra at CIM as a bassoonist, but if you feel like you need a 6th hour that week of orchestra playing, then you can do the lab orchestra, and there's all kinds of opportunities there.
And then specifically more with bassoon scholarship, we were talking about George Goslee. George was the principal bassoonist of the Cleveland Orchestra for many years, and was going to welcome in Richard Meek, who interviewed George, and just about how you were awarded that, Gareth, and when I graduated, got the award. And Richard, would you want to share about your interactions with George?
Of course, I grew up in Lorraine, so in my high school days, and even at Oberlin, I took pleasure in going in and hearing Cleveland Symphony play, and George, listening to him play. The interview was taking some time after he had retired, of course, he and his wife, and they were up at Cuyahoga Falls, I think is where his house was. And so I just stopped in and visited with him one time, and I can't remember how long the interview was, but I do recall taking pictures of his instrument, which he's famous for. James Roberson has an 8,000 series that Sawicki put in the same condition as George's 8,000 series, which what's his name in Boston bought. So Carl had gone over that instrument and knew it quite well. The fun story I remember was that at one time, George was playing the 8,000 series, this back in the 50s, and he'd gotten, I think, a 10,000. And he wanted to have a good backup instrument. So he took that instrument to the rehearsal one day to try it out. And he was called into Zell's office after that and said, "What's going on? What's happened?" And George told him, "Well, I was trying out this back-end instrument, this new instrument I got as a backup." And at which time Zell informed him, "Well, that's fine and dandy, but don't do it again."
Franz said once, he did an interview, and he said, "Yeah, George Zell used to tell the English horn player which optometrist to go to. That doesn't work anymore." Zell ruled with an iron fist, but he made this orchestra what it is. And there's an award that's Julie mentioned, that's given out at the end of each year, usually to one of the graduating bassoonists, which bears his name. And what George, in my view, did for bassoon playing generally, but particularly in Cleveland, was he established the idea that the bassoon sound did not have to be compromised in order to play in orchestra. That a gorgeous sound could project in the absence of extraneous white noise. And that is something that continues to this day here. John upholds that tradition to the highest imaginable level. And I try to do the same. But yeah, George Goslee's influence on the instrument in that respect cannot be overstated.
Well, a lot of people don't realize this. George is quite an adept photographer. I haven't seen it work.
Yeah, I heard that.
He was quite well known for that.
Could you share with us more about techniques and skills that you focus on when practicing?
Yeah, for me, it's really all about scales over the entire range of the instrument, done up to what some folks might consider to be masochistically high speed, and focusing on machine-like, computer-like accuracy. And the reason I do that is because you often hear it said, and I agree with this, that music is about it. When you play music, what you're doing is showing people who you are, and that it's very important to have a full and just basically a full and engaging life that you can communicate to your listeners, and that's what makes your music compelling. And I agree with that. But it's always been my view, and Joanne stressed this point, that in order to communicate that, you must have the fundament of technical mastery required to allow you to do so. And in the absence of that technical mastery, you can have the fullest, most engaging, most beautiful things to say, but you won't be able to communicate it, and people will not be they won't be engaged by what it is that you're doing.
Or simply stated, you don't want the musicianship to be compromised by lack of a technique.
Exactly. It would be a shame for that to be the case.
I was really pleased the other day in your interview that you commented that you got your scales and arpeggios up to 144. 4 notes at 144. That was my goal while on Eastman.
And scales, the arpeggios are great too, but the fact of the matter is, if you can do that with just your major scales, then you are already, if you can get your major scales to 116 and you can play a great K191, then you are already ahead of 95% of the other people against whom you will ultimately be competing, because this, you know, this is a beautiful business, but it's also a competitive one. If you can kick that up to 144, then you are a formidable opponent in an audition.
We cover the literature very much. Only one time on my career did I ever play faster than that. We did the Ravel Piano Concerto, and the last movement he took at 166.
Oh, it seems like we do the Ravel Piano Concerto every year at Blossom, and we do it at Severance. I think I've probably played it 4 or 5 times since I've been here. And now and again, I've done it with John, and I've done it with Barry. And here we split it up. We do what's written. I think the tradition of playing the Ravel Concerto all on first, I think it, and correct me anyone if I'm wrong, but I believe that it dates from a period of time where second bassoonists could not be relied on to play that part. And I flatter myself that now they can. We split it up, and we've done it a couple times. Thibaudet has played it here, and lots of other notable pianists as well. And I think Thibaudet took it at about 180. And it's like, and I think that was when Barry and I were doing it, and Barry described it as it's so fast that your consciousness floats up out of your body above your head and watches you doing it. It's like you're not even part of the equation anymore. It's either off or it's on at that speed. And when you're playing in the Cleveland Orchestra, you better hope it's on, not off. And so practice your scales, folks. In the interview, I talked about scales over the whole range of the instrument, low B flat to high E on every scale, and that is true. But there's one other thing I didn't talk about, and that's playing your scales modally. So I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You go up, like if you're on a low B flat, you're doing a B flat major scale. You go from low B flat to the C, and then back down to the C, and then up to the D, and down to the D, like that. And I saw a question: do you tongue your scales when you go up to 144? I personally don't. In order to achieve the tactile mastery required, in my opinion, tonguing the scale would actually be counterproductive, because you're not looking. This is not a double tonguing exercise. This is a neural pathway establishment exercise, and so the tongue is going to get in the way. Okay, you don't want anything getting in the way of you ironing out those mental pathways so that you have absolute technical mastery and alacrity at any speed that you need. That was an aside, because I saw that question come up on the screen. The modal scale. Those are incredibly important, because what's the most difficult thing on bassoon technically? I'll answer that one myself. It's changing direction at a high speed. So playing a B major scale or an F sharp major scale over the entire range of the instrument is one thing. Being able to change those directions and do it like this, there's an extra added layer of complexity there. And then if that gets too easy, then you can do it in fives instead of in eights, and you can do it like that as well. But I'm telling you, if you can hit just your major scales all slurred over the entire range of the instrument, and you can knock out, I said this pretty much verbatim in the interview, but I strongly believe it, all your major scales and K191 exposition, you're solid. You're going to be fine. But people don't practice that because it's hard and it's frustrating and it makes you mad, and it's you have to confront your own. You really have to confront the limits of your abilities to do that. but if you can have the mental fortitude to do it and to push through it, then you will reap the rewards. If you listening to this, if you resolve, gee, that doesn't sound like a bad idea, I'm going to do that. You might start, and like when I say accuracy, I mean like as I say, like a computer would do it, and really be honest with yourself. Is this as accurate as it could be theoretically? If the answer is no, then it needs to be better. But like, you're not going to start anywhere close to that. If this is something you haven't done much of before, you might be starting at, you might be at 1/16 to the 16th note, and that's fine. That's completely fine. Where you are now is not what is important. What is important is that you have a stepwise, concrete plan which takes you predictably from where you are now to where you want to get. It's the same with strength training. We were talking about strength training. It works the exact same way. You need to know where you are now. You need to have a very concrete idea of where you want to be. And you need to have an incremental plan, day to day, which takes you from point A to point B. If you have that, then it doesn't actually matter where you are now. If you're doing, like, you can be at 80 to the 16th, and you do all your scales at that today, and you iron that out, and you nail it. And then tomorrow, you're at 84 to the 16th. And then the next day, you're at 88. And quicker than you think, you're going to be into the territory of where you're really getting competitive. So it's impossible and just daunting as it may seem at the start, the improvements will fly your way. And here's another thing that's important to note: inspiration follows action. People talk about being inspired by stuff they read and stuff they hear all the time. I don't think that's inspiration, not really. I think that's excitement. Inspiration is when you come in and you start a new protocol, and then a month in, you look at where you were compared to where you are now, and you have concrete, quantifiable proof that what you're doing is working. That's inspiring.
I'm going to share a comment, Gareth, from Ian. Mm-hmm. He says, scales on the whole range like this were always asked by Professor Meek as his students' practice routine. Hearing this concept today and here made me really happy that I'm doing this routine. So thank you, Mr. Meek. And thank you, Gareth.
Well done, Professor Meek. Wise words.
Any sort of course or workshop that you wish you had been exposed to or students today had the option to attend?
I was clear from the very start on exactly what I wanted to do and where I wanted to get to. And for me, it involved sitting in a practice room when other people were asleep. So for me, there's not a good answer to that question, because I tended to view classes as annoying distractions from the real work. Now, and I'm not saying that my outlook is the right one. I'm not saying that, especially in this day and age, my outlook is even the wise one. Things like like marketing, I think probably some kind of focus on business, some focus on economics, that kind of thing would certainly not be the worst idea. But I mean, just speaking completely honestly, I would have been the guy that cut that class to go practice. That's just.
A book comes to mind that Barrick Stees recommended. It's called Talent is Overrated, where it's about, putting in your hours.
A deficit in talent can very much more easily be made up for with hard work than a deficit in hard work can be made up for in talent. there are now and again you'll find the one generational exception where that person could have done anything and succeeded. Although honestly, when you think about generational talents on bassoon, those people were in practice rooms 4 hours a day when they were 11. You know, like it seems like just unerring, single-minded work is pretty much a common denominator between the people who get to high levels in this business. I can't think of anyone as talented as you care to imagine that didn't also just bust their rear end in the practice room and outwork everybody else. And I'm convinced I've beaten in auditions lots of people who are more talented than I am, because they were sleeping and I was practicing. Stress recovery adaptation is the method, and the rest part of that is very important. But if the work's not done, you don't quit.
I love how that ties into we were talking about with strength building when lifting weights.
The process by which strength adaptations are acquired by the body and the process by which neural pathways are formed are not the same. They're not similar. But nevertheless, there is a real similarity with strength training. You literally get stronger when you sleep. That is when the body synthesizes new contractile tissue to cope with the added stress that it has been subjected to. But how many times think about it, anyone here, how many times have you worked your fingers until they ached and you couldn't play anymore on a particular passage? And you got to and I say don't quit until the work is done, but also there comes a point where you can tell you're into the realm of diminishing returns, and you're like, I've been beating my head against this wall for 6 hours and it's 2 a.m. and I just need to sleep. And you go home and you go to bed and you wake up and you pull out the horn the next morning and you play the passage and it's perfect the first time. How many people here haven't had that experience? I'm sure everybody had. Right? Amazing things happen when we get our rest too. So I'm not saying don't sleep, go on no sleep, because that doesn't work for anyone. I'm saying you have to outwork your competition. I don't care if you do it at midnight or at 6 a.m, but you need to work harder than them.
If I may, I like a way that Mathieu Harel talks about this. He mentioned it yesterday at Bassoon Day at McGill again.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned it at I've heard him say this like 3 different times in master classes. And that is, you take your passage at the tempo you can play it perfectly today. As you said also, Gareth, if that's 80 to the 16th note, that's just the way it is. You take it at the tempo you can play it perfectly today. And you increase it by 1 click only on the old-fashioned metronome, which basically means 3 clicks, and then and just 1 click only, and you play it perfectly at that 1 click only today, and then you put it away. You don't sit there and try to get it perfect at 144 today. You put it away, and then you come back to it tomorrow, and you do it again at yesterday's tempo and 1 click faster tomorrow. And he gives an example. I can't remember now which excerpt he gives the example of, and he says, but then if you do the math, and he does the math really quick in French, and he says, in 23 days you'll have it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And it works every time.
Who is this, Joanne, you were talking about?
Mathieu Harel. He's the associate principal in Montreal and the teacher at the Conservatoire in Montreal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you get under a squat bar for the first time in your life, the squat bar weighs 45 pounds. You've never squatted before. You get under the squat bar and you do 3 sets of 5 reps with the empty squat bar weighing 45 pounds, and you increase the weight that you're using. You do this three times a week, and you increase the weight that you're using by 5 pounds every time you do it. By the end of the year, you'll be squatting 315 for 3 sets of 5. Tiny adaptations, tiny improvements over time add up to absolutely profound improvements.
I guess one of the problems from a teacher perspective, though, is getting young people to understand that. You know, like 15-year-olds who want to do it now.
Yeah, guilty as charged,
yeah.
as you know.
Yeah, right. It's really tough. That's why I wish, you know, like, I'm glad you're recording this, Julie, because I wish these young people could hear someone half my age or less say this, instead of just always someone with the gray hair saying it, someone who could be their grandmother. But no.
Well, if anyone's listening, I studied with Joanne, and she couldn't get me to do this either.
Exactly.
I was your age. True. But if I had, I'd have gotten to where I am that much sooner.
Yeah.
And there's no substitute for it. You can learn to do it now, or you can learn to do it when you're 17 and you're in university and you're like, gee, maybe there's something to this. That's what I did. But you will learn this sooner or later.
You'll have to, yeah.
If you want to play Scheherazade in front of a paying audience and transport them across the sea, you know, to see the Calendar Prince or whatever it is, and you want to collect a paycheck after you do it, you have to do what Joanne and Julie and I and everybody else are telling you now. You can't have one without the other. And playing pretty songs won't get you there.
Just going back with rest, Jackie shared a really, you know, just a good point of just get rest before you try to learn something and then sleep after you learn it. Just before starting today's discussion, Gareth was sharing some of your flies from fishing and demonstrated an intruder. Just parallel all of this really detailed work with our reed making.
Have more in common than you think. What they have in common is the need for tactile precision, and they help each other. And yeah, I'm a big fly fisherman. I fly fish for steelhead. That's my favorite thing to do. And I tie my own steelhead flies. And yeah, the you know, the tiny in-close work that you do on a reed, where you're trying to take the tip of the reed from, you know, in the center from 9/1000ths of an inch down to 7 or 8. You know, you're trying to there's a lot in common with working with, you know, unruly natural and synthetic fibers and trying to bend them to your will in fly tying. And what I found is that the two complement each other really, really well. I said in the interview, but I can say again, since you've brought flies up, I'm a self-taught fly tyer. And things that are reputed in the fly tying community to be really hard and really difficult to get your head around, and they take a lot of practice and they're frustrating and you're going to burn through a whole ton of material learning this stuff, they work for me the first time, and I never really have to worry about them. And I'm convinced that it's because of all the reed making I do. And then if I go through a period such as I've been doing in the pandemic, where I'm tying a whole bunch of advanced steelhead flies, when I pull out a reed and work on it, it's like the reed trims itself. The two things, they really help each other. They balance one another remarkably well. And if you're getting sick of reed making, like can happen, go tie a fly and then come back to it. Also, it's about your eyes, right? It's about identifying and eliminating a lack of balance. And I think a lot of the time people get wrapped up in the minutiae, and they forget that a reed has to be balanced in terms of thickness, from blade to blade, and also from one side of a blade to another. If you think about the four quadrants of a reed, the very most important element that allows the reed to function is the balance. And you have that in flies too. You literally have it in flies, because if the fly is tied in an unbalanced way, then it won't ride true in the water, and it won't look like anything that a fish will eat. And if a reed is trimmed in an unbalanced way, it won't respond. It won't. It won't sound good. It'll vibrate in an uneven way, and it won't be anything that a person would ever want to listen to. So there's that kind of mental aspect to it as well.
Is there anything new that you've learned recently that you'd want to share about?
The pandemic has taught me a lot about the nature of motivation, and how if there's kind of nothing to be practicing for, it's real hard to pull the horn out of the case and practice when there's nothing to practice for. But what and I mean, it's easy for me to say. I'm in a comfortable position here. If I'm having trouble being motivated to practice, I mean, I still have my job, and my job will be there when this is all over. For folks who are still working, and working on landing that big position, I can only imagine that this must be incredibly difficult to maintain your focus and keep that relentless pursuit of mastery when you're not entirely sure what it is you're even really being asked to master. But I do strongly believe in what I said before, that inspiration follows action. So what that means is that sometimes, even when you're not motivated, and even when you don't feel like it, and you'd rather not, you still pull the bassoon out of the case, because a breakthrough can happen. And when the auditions start up again, you have the opportunity to be twice the player that you were when all of this started. I haven't been this long without playing a service since I was probably 10 years old. It's been since March. I haven't played a service since March, and in this orchestra, winds are not going back until probably May. So by the end of this, it's going to be 14 or 15 months that I will have played a single note in an orchestra, and that's totally it's totally alien.
An orchestra that I play with, the Gatineau Symphony, we were in rehearsal on the day when everything shut down. We were in rehearsal for a concert that weekend, when the conductor stood up in front of us and said, "Sorry, the theaters have been mandated, they have to close, we cannot perform our concert." This orchestra has put off the start date of their 2021 season 1, 2, 3, 4 times.
Yeah.
We were they finally decided February should be safe, and a week ago we were supposed to start the season, and that couldn't happen either. Now they're hoping for April, like
Yeah.
the orchestra, Gareth.
Well, I mean, we're going to have at least a blossom season. But
yeah, good. Mm-hmm.
Who's conducting there now? It's not still Louis, is it?
Oh no, it's Yves Leveillé.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's funny. He conducted the
Conservatoire. Yeah.
Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, everybody has stories like that to tell.
Is there a memory about New Zealand that comes to mind that you'd want to share about?
I spent a year, those who don't know, I spent a year in New Zealand. I turned 7 in New Zealand. And yeah, no, I mean, what a place. I mean, it's a lot of my memories, like the most vivid ones, have to do with rugby, because I got into rugby when I was there. My dad's blooded Welshmen. So that's, another country where rugby has replaced syndicated state religion. And so, yeah, just like the fanaticism. But I don't know if you guys have ever seen an All Blacks game, a New Zealand All Blacks game. They do that war dance at the start of the game. It's called the Haka. And as Julie, I'm not telling Julie, she lives there, she knows this better than I do. The Haka has this sacred place in Maori culture, and so I think probably the thing that sticks out most is learning a Haka and actually performing one as a little kid in school. And only Maori can lead it, but anyone can do it. So as long as you're not trying to lead one when you're not a Maori, then you're okay. And yeah, no, I think that's probably the thing that sticks out the most. That and the unbelievable fishing. It's just incredible. So yeah, and I mean it's like there are places it's like being on the moon, with the landscape and everything, and the I guess as it turns out, there's a whole lot more I remember about it than just the Haka. But the unique wildlife, the fact that because it's so isolated, you don't have crossover in terms of wildlife. There are, I think, is it right, Julie, that there are no mammals indigenous to New Zealand besides this one species of fruit bat? I think that's true.
Yes.
Just everything. It's totally different than anywhere else in the world. You got to go. It's fantastic. There's nothing poisonous in New Zealand. Nothing. So if you're not a bug person or a snake person, New Zealand is the place for you.
Yeah, I love hearing just about your experiences.
I mean, when the All Blacks, I think, have a couple of Hakas that they do now. And when they're up against an opponent they really want to beat, they do one that is sort of particular to them. It's an All Black Haka, but the standard one that they do against most opponents or in games that are not especially sort of important, that's the one I learned, and I know that Haka. I could do that Haka with them if I had to.
Just a few days ago, one of their lead New Zealand rugby players, Dan Carter, just retired.
He had played. Yeah, no, he was like this. I mean, he's Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky and Tiger Woods all riddled into one. I mean, he's the most unbelievable rugby player there's ever been. But he stopped playing for New Zealand a few years after the 2015 World Cup, I want to say, which New Zealand just absolutely cleaned up in. I mean, it was just it wasn't a competition. It was a formality. It was ridiculous. And then he went over to France to play for a little bit. Yeah, that's for the Canucks among us. That's like Gretzky retiring, or I guess now it's like Crosby, when he retires.
This is Jackie and Phil. Small community orchestras in our area are preparing small ensembles for recording and broadcasting at a later time. This
is one potential silver lining of the pandemic is a lot of orchestras had started doing this anyway, but I think a lot more of them are going to be doing it now. They're going to be kitted out for the capacity to stream to larger audiences. Detroit had been doing this for ages, ever since their lockout. Obviously, I mean, ironically enough, the Met would be wonderfully situated to do this if they were playing or being paid, but that's a discussion for another time. And actually, like Toledo, just south of Detroit, took the lead from Detroit just after I left Toledo, and they got kitted out. And now, I mean, we, Cleveland, have been, we developed an app called Adela, and we've been promulgating a whole lot of free content for now, and some paid as well. You can pay for a subscription to Adela and get all the content. But I do think that this pandemic will have sort of reinforced the idea for everybody that streaming to a wider audience, and allowing you to attract a larger cadre of fans is the way forward.
So grateful to connect with each of you, and Gareth, thank you so much for this discussion today.